Let me tell you a story about a deal that seemed too good to be true, one I wish I'd never made. It all started with a Facebook Marketplace ad, just like any other, except that this one caught my eye with a certain creepiness. The post read antique doll for sale, free to a good home. There was something about the photo of the doll that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. She was dressed in a little faded old-fashioned blue dress, with pale porcelain skin, cracked in places, and glassy eyes that looked too real. But I love vintage finds, and who doesn't love free? The seller was named Margaret, an elderly woman who seemed eager to part with the doll. When I messaged her, she replied almost instantly, insisting I come that night if I wanted it. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. I mean, how often do you get the chance to own something so unique? When I arrived at her house, it was pitch black. Margaret answered the door, her face lined with age and eyes that looked so tired. She handed over the doll without a word. I asked if there was anything I should know about it, maybe some history behind it. She just looked at me almost sad and said, "Please, just take her." I thanked her, though her silence made me uneasy. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the doll in the passenger seat. Her head was tilted, and her blank eyes seemed to follow me no matter how much I tried to look away. But I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. When I got home, I placed the doll on the shelf in my living room and didn't think much more about it. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing this faint tapping sound, like someone gently knocking on glass. I checked the windows, the doors, and even my phone, but nothing. After about an hour of laying there, trying to ignore it, I finally got up to investigate, and when I stepped into the living room, my heart nearly stopped. The doll was sitting in the middle of the floor, facing me. I left her on the shelf. I was sure of it, but there she was, her tiny cracked face, staring at me with those lifeless glassy eyes. My logic side took over. I figured maybe she'd fallen. I mean, houses settle, things move. I picked her up and placed her back on the shelf, telling myself it was nothing. But as the days passed, things got stranger. Each morning, I would find her in a new spot. Once she was sitting on my kitchen counter, her little legs dangling over the edge. Another time she ended up in my bathroom, propped up on the sink, as if she'd been watching me sleepwalk around the house. I started getting nervous, but I still tried to brush it off. Dolls don't move on their own. It had to be me, right? Then the dreams started. Every night I dreamed of the doll. In the dreams, she was no longer lifeless, but alive, walking around the house, watching me from dark corners, whispering things I couldn't quite make out. I'd wake up covered in sweat, my heart racing, and I always, she would be in a different place. One night the tapping sound returned, louder this time, almost frantic. I followed it, heart pounding, and found the doll laying on the floor again. But this time, she was facing the front door, her arm outstretched as if pointing at it. I was done. I wanted her out of my house. The next morning I packed her up, determined to return her to Margaret. But when I tried to contact her, she was gone. Her Facebook profile had disappeared without a trace. No phone number, no address, nothing. It was as if she never existed. Panicking, I listed the doll back on Marketplace, hoping someone else would take her off my hands. Almost immediately, I got a response. A man named Paul wanted to pick her up that evening. I can't even explain the relief I felt when he came by and took her away. For the first time in days, I slept peacefully, but that relief didn't last long. The very next day, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there she was, the doll sitting on the doorsteps, staring up at me with those glassy eyes. A note was attached, written in a shaky hand. "She belongs with you." I tried everything after that. I donated her to thrift stores, left her on park benches, even drove miles out of town to leave her by the roadside. But no matter what I did, she always came back. Every morning I'd open my door or wake up to find her there, waiting, her gaze fixed on me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to burn her. I took her out to a secluded area, poured gasoline over her, and set her on fire. As the flames took hold, I thought I heard a faint, eerie giggle, like that of a little girl. It made my blood run cold, but the doll finally burned to ash, and I left that place, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But just when I thought it was over, I received a package in the mail a few days later. No return address, no note, just a plain brown box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the doll, completely unharmed, her blue dress as pristine as the first day I'd seen her. I'm telling you a story not to scare you. Okay, maybe a little, but to warn you. If you ever see an ad for a free antique doll on Facebook Marketplace, think twice before you hit message, because sometimes the things we pick up aren't meant to be given away. This story isn't about some cursed doll or a haunted painting. Nope, it's a desk. Plain, simple, and completely unassuming. Or at least that's what I thought when I first found it on Facebook Marketplace. The ad caught my eye because it was listed for free, which was strange since it had an antique, sturdy, and frankly in perfect shape. The description was simple. Desk, free to anyone who can haul it away. Need gone as soon as possible. I've been looking for a desk for my home office, so I thought, why not? When I contacted the seller, he responded right away and seemed almost relieved. He quickly gave me his address and said, just take it, I don't want it anymore. I figured he was moving or something, but when I got there, his house was fully furnished. He led me to a small back room where the desk sat, looking like something straight out of an old study. Dark wood, orient carvings, and brass handles on the drawers. Why are you giving it away? I asked, occasionally running my fingers over the smooth surface. The seller hesitated, then shrugged. Just bad vibes, I guess, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I laughed it off, assuming he was joking. I thanked him, loaded the desk into my truck, and brought it home. Once I got it set up in my office, I admire how it gave the room a sophisticated touch. It felt solid, well-crafted, and seemed to be in perfect condition. That night I was working late, typing away at my laptop, when I heard a slight creaking noise. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but the sound seemed to come from the desk itself, like the wood was shifting or groaning. I ignored it, chalking it up to the age of the piece. Next morning, I woke up and went to my office to start work, but the desk was gone. I stared at the empty space in disbelief, thinking I was losing my mind. I searched the house, half expecting to find it somewhere else, but no, there was no sign of it. I texted the seller asking if he'd taken it back somehow, maybe with a spare key or something, but he didn't respond. Frustrated and confused, I let it go, thinking maybe someone had somehow stolen it. I decided I'd just buy a new desk and forget about it. 2 days later, I walked into my office and nearly jumped out of my skin. The desk was back, right where I originally placed it. I checked every window and door in the house, thinking someone was playing a prank on me. But there was no sign of forced entry. And besides, why would anyone bother stealing a desk just to bring it back? I examined it closely, looking for any clue as to what was happening. When I opened one of the drawers, I found a small piece of paper tucked inside. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, and it simply read, "This desk belongs here. Don't move it." I was officially creeped out, but instead of getting rid of the desk again, I decided to leave it alone. I figured if it wanted to stay there, so be it. For a while, everything was normal. I worked at the desk and occasionally heard some odd creaks, but nothing else happened until I tried to clean it out. One Saturday, I was rearranging my office and decided to organize the drawers. That's when I found more notes, tucked inside under the felt lining. Each note seemed older than the last, like they'd been there for years, possibly decades. They all had different handwriting, but the message was always the same. This desk belongs here. The notes unsettled me, but I convinced myself they were just remnants from previous owners who'd been superstitious. I tried to put it out of my mind and continue using the desk. A week later, my friend Mike came over to help me move some furniture. When he saw the desk, he paused, eyeing it with an uneasy look. "You didn't get that desk from Facebook Marketplace, did you?" he asked, frowning. When I told him I had, his face went pale. Apparently, he'd seen that exact desk a few months earlier. He'd helped another friend move it out of their apartment, only for it to mysteriously reappear. The next day, his friend had been so freaked out, they ended up moving, leaving the desk behind. I laughed it off, thinking it sounded like an urban legend, but Mike was serious. He warned me to get rid of it while I still could. I tried, I really did. That same day, I listed it back on Marketplace, giving it away for free, just like the original ad. A young couple came by, eager to take it off my hands. I helped them load it into their truck, wished them luck, and closed the door, thinking I was done with it. But the very next morning, there it was, back in my office, right in its usual spot. The couple hadn't messaged me or anything, and when I checked my messages, I found no trace of our conversation. It was as if they never existed. At this point, I was desperate. I considered burning the desk or chopping it up, but something about it made me hesitate, like it was watching me. The thought was ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling, and then more notes started to appear. Each morning, I'd find a new one slipped into the drawer overnight. The messages grew more intense. "This desk belongs here. Don't try to get rid of it, and you don't understand." The final note, written in that dark, shaky handwriting, simply read, "You're not the first." After that note, I stopped trying to get rid of it. I decided maybe it was best to just leave it alone. I worked at it during the day, avoided it at night, and the creaking sounds continued, almost like breathing. I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting, I don't know, something. One evening, I invited Mike over again and told him everything that had happened. He looked at the desk with the same unease and finally suggested we try moving it out together, just one last time. We carried it outside to the curb, left it there, and went back inside thinking it was finally over. But later that night, I heard the sound of creaking wood coming from the living room. My heart sank as I stepped out of my bed. There, right in the middle of the room, was the desk, as if it had never left. And this time, there was a new note, placed neatly in the center of the desk. It said, "This desk isn't going anywhere. Stop trying." That was the last straw. I decided then and there to leave. I packed up all my things and moved to a new apartment. I didn't take any furniture with me, just in case. For a few months, everything was quiet. I thought I escaped whatever strange power that desk had. But then a few days ago, I received a notification on Facebook Marketplace. Someone had posted that same desk, and the description was simple. "Desk for free to anyone who can haul it away. Need gone as soon as possible." It was 11 p.m. on a quiet Thursday night when Julia found herself scrolling through Facebook Marketplace. She'd been looking for a dresser for weeks, something that had a bit of a charm and didn't break the bank. After scrolling past countless listings, a particular one caught her eye. Antique dresser, $50. The photo showed a dark, polished wood dresser with intricate carvings that looked like it could have been from another century. She loved vintage pieces and was drawn to the warmth of the wood and the elegance of the design. Plus $50 was a steal. She clicked on the listing, noting the seller's name was Nina D. Dree. Without hesitation, Julia typed a quick message. "Hi, is the dresser still available?" She half expected no reply, assuming it would already be gone at such a low price. But to her surprise, her phone buzzed almost immediately. Yes, it's available. Are you interested? The reply read. Julia responded quickly, confirming her interest. She was eager to set up a time to pick it up. But what came next was unexpected. I can only meet after midnight. Will that be okay? Julia hesitated, glancing at the time. Midnight felt a bit unusual for a meetup, but it was the only time the seller said she was available. And it wasn't that late, right? After a moment's thought, she typed back, "Sure, midnight works." At exactly 11:55 p.m., Julia pulled up to the address the seller had given her. The neighborhood was old, filled with houses that seemed to have stood there for decades, maybe even centuries. Her GPS guided her to a large Victorian house at the end of a dimly lit street. Its peeling paint and ivory-covered walls gave the place an eerie charm, but Julia felt a slight chill as she stepped out of her car. She sent a quick message, "I'm here." Almost instantly, her phone buzzed. "Please come to the back door." Julia hesitated, feeling a slight unease. She walked down a narrow alley along the side of the house, her footsteps echoing off the walls. Shadows seemed to grow tall and reach toward her, though she knew it was just her mind playing tricks. When she reached the backyard, the back door was already slightly ajar. "Hello," she called softly, stepping inside. The house was almost silent, the only sound a faint creak of the floorboards beneath her. Just as she was about to turn and leave, her eyes landed on the dresser in the corner of the room. It was beautiful, even more stunning than it had looked in the photos. She moved closer, admiring the intricate carvings and the smooth finish. But as she reached out to touch, a cold voice spoke behind her. "Do you like it?" Julia jumped, spinning around. Stepping there was a woman, her skin pale and her eyes sunken with deep shadows. She wore an old-fashioned dress that looked out of place, and there was a strange intensity in her gaze that made Julia feel like she was being watched, studied. "Yes, it's beautiful," Julia managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. The woman didn't respond with a smile or a word. She simply nodded and gestured to the dresser. "Take it, it's yours now." Julia, wanting to finish the deal as quickly as possible, handed over the $50, feeling the woman's cold fingers brush against hers. Without another word, she dragged the dresser out, loaded into her car, and drove home, her mind racing. Something about the woman and that house had unsettled her, but she couldn't quite place what. Later that night, Julia finally settled into bed, but as she was drifting off to sleep, her phone buzzed again. Confused, she picked it up and saw a message from Nina D. Dree. "Do you like the dresser?" Julia blinked, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. She didn't remember giving the seller her phone number. She hadn't even expected another message after the deal was done. Trying to brush it off, she replied, "Yes, thank you, it's perfect." Immediately, another message came through. "Perfect, it's happy to be home." Julia froze. "It's happy to be home." That was an odd thing to say about a piece of furniture. She shook her head, tossed her phone aside, and tried to sleep. The next day, Julia arranged the dresser in her bedroom, filling it with clothes and odds and ends. But as she used it, small, strange things began happening. She'd hear faint scratching noises in the middle of the night, or find the drawers open in the morning, when she was sure she had closed them. Sometimes she'd catch a whiff of something musty and old, like damp wood or decay. One evening, while laying in bed, she looked over at the dresser and noticed something she hadn't seen before. One of the carvings on the side, hidden in the wood's intricate design, looked eerily like a face twisted in agony. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Nina D. Dree. "Have you found it yet?" Julia's hands began to tremble. She typed back quickly. "Found what?" The reply was almost instant. The secret. You'll see it soon enough. Julia set her phone down, her heart pounding. She walked over to the dresser and examined it closely. Running her fingers along the wood, she suddenly felt a loose panel along the back. Pulling at it, she managed to remove the panel, revealing a small, dark compartment hidden inside. Inside was an old, tattered photo of a young woman, eyes wide with terror. Beneath it lay a yellowed piece of paper, faded with age, scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "This is my prison." At that moment, her phone buzzed one last time. "Do you like it?" Emily loved hunting for bargains online. She was on Facebook Marketplace nearly every night, looking for unique finds to decorate her new apartment. One evening, she spotted an old armchair listed for $5. It was a classic with worn leather and intricate wooden carvings along the arms and back. Though it had seen better days, Emily saw potential. With a bit of polish, she thought it could add character to her living room. The listing was simple: old armchair, $5, pickup only. There was no detailed description, no backstory, just a few dark photos of the chair. She messaged the seller right away, asking if it was still available. Almost immediately, she received a reply. "Yes, it's available, but I should warn you, people have returned it." Emily chuckled to herself. Returned it for $5? That was unusual. Curious, she typed back, "Why would people return it?" There was a pause before the reply came through. They said it made them uncomfortable. "You're welcome to come see it if you're still interested." Brushing off the warning as superstition, Emily agreed to pick it up the next day. The next evening, Emily pulled up to the address the seller had given her. The house was old, the paint peeling, the windows dark. She texted the seller, and a few moments later, an elderly man came to the door and waved her inside. The armchair was in the corner of the dimly lit living room. In person, it looked even more worn. The leather cracked and faded in places, but there was something captivating about it, something that drew her in. She couldn't resist running her fingers over the cool leather. The old man cleared his throat, pulling her from her thoughts. "You're welcome to take it," he said, his voice low, "but I won't be surprised if you bring it back." Emily laughed, dismissing the strange comment. "Don't worry, I won't be bringing it back." She hauled the armchair into her car, eager to get it home. That night, Emily carefully placed the chair in the corner of her living room, next to the small bookshelf. It looked perfect, filling the empty space with a bit of an old-world charm. She sat down in it, testing it out, and found it surprisingly comfortable. But as she sat there, she began to feel strange. A prickling sensation crept up her spine, and the room seemed to grow colder. She shrugged it off as nerves. It was late, and she was just tired from the move. Emily decided to call it a night and went to bed, leaving the chair behind in the dark living room. The next morning, she woke up to find the chair had moved. It was a small shift, angled slightly toward the doorway as if someone had turned it. She frowned, trying to remember if she left it that way, but ultimately she shrugged it off as something she must have done without thinking. Over the next few days, though the strange occurrences continued, every morning the chair seemed to be in a slightly different position. Sometimes it was facing the door, sometimes the window. Once she even found it pulled a few inches from the wall. She tried to ignore it, chalking it up to her imagination or maybe a quirk of an old chair's leg. But at night she started hearing faint creaks coming from the living room, as if someone were shifting in the chair. When she'd go to check, of course she'd find the room empty and silent, the chair innocently still. One night, as she was trying to fall asleep, Emily heard the softest sound, a whisper, almost too quiet to make out. She lay there perfectly still, her heart pounding, straining to hear. The whisper was coming from the direction of the living room, though she couldn't make out the words. Against her best judgment, she got out of bed and crept toward the sound. The house was silent except for the faint whisper. She turned the corner into the living room and her breath caught. The chair was facing her, angled slightly toward the hallway. The whispering stopped. Feeling foolish but truly creeped out, she backed away and went to bed, deciding that tomorrow she'd get rid of it. Maybe the old man was right. Maybe this chair was more trouble than it was worth. The following morning, Emily put the chair back on Facebook Marketplace, listing it for $5, just as the previous seller had. She wrote, "Antique armchair, $5, slightly worn but unique." Within minutes, someone messaged her back about it. That evening, a young man came by to pick up the chair. They complimented her apartment, thanked her for the chair, and left, clearly pleased with their new find. Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders as she watched him drive away. The chair was gone, and now finally her apartment felt lighter. But that night she got a message. It was from the young man who had taken the chair. "Hey, sorry to bother you, but did you ever have any strange experiences with this chair?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated before typing back, "Why do you ask?" There was a long pause before he replied, "It just doesn't feel right. Every time I sit in it, it feels like someone's watching, and I swear it moves on its own." She stared at her phone, feeling a chill run down her spine. The same thing that had happened to her and to the old man before her. She didn't know how to respond. The man messaged again, "Would you be okay if I brought it back?" Emily wanted to say no, but a part of her felt a strange responsibility for the chair. Maybe it was better to have it with her, where she knew what to expect, rather than letting it haunt someone else. So she agreed. The next day, the man returned, looking just as unsettled as she had felt the first night. She brought the chair. He left without a word, and there it was, the armchair, back in her living room, almost as if it had never left. That night, as she sat on her couch staring at it, she noticed something she hadn't before. Carved into the wood on the back, in tiny, barely noticeable script, were words, "Sit if you dare." A shiver ran down her spine, but she couldn't look away. In some strange, inexplicable way, she felt connected to it now. She moved closer, her fingers tracing the letters carved into the wood. As she did, she heard it again, the faint whisper coming from within the leather and wood. This time the words were clear. "You can't get rid of me." Emily backed away, but she knew the truth. No matter what she did, no matter how many times she tried to give it away, the chair would always find its way back, and now it was hers. It all started when I bought a chest off of Facebook Marketplace. The listing caught my eye immediately. Mystery chest unopened for decades. What's inside? Something about the photo just drew me in. The chest was old, worn, and looked like it had been left in some forgotten basement for ages. The description was short, a little eerie even, found in the attic of a historic home. This chest hasn't been opened in decades. Whoever buys it gets to find out what's inside, if they dare. I thought it was a little creepy, but intriguing. Curiosity got the best of me, so I messaged the seller. They didn't give much info, just directions to an old house on the outskirts of town where I could pick it up. When I arrived, the place was particularly falling apart. Dusty, creaky, the kind of place that felt like it had its share of secrets. The seller, an older woman, met me at the door. She barely spoke and seemed strange, as if she couldn't wait to get rid of the chest. She didn't make any eye contact, and as she handed over, she whispered, "Once it's yours, don't bring it back." It felt like she was warning me, but I shrugged it off, thinking it was just her way to make the sale more mysterious. The chest was smaller than I expected, about the size of a suitcase, but incredibly heavy, made of dark wood with rusted iron edges. It looked like it had been through centuries of wear. And on top, I noticed an inscription scratched into the wood, almost hidden under a layer of grime. Do not open. Next to those words was a carving of an eye wide open, staring. It felt like it was watching me no matter which angle I looked from. When I got home, I set the chest down in my living room, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at it. I could feel this strange energy radiating from it, a sort of heaviness that made the air feel thick. But I was too curious to stop now. I had to know what was inside. I tried the lock, but it was rusted shut, so I grabbed a crowbar and went to work. It took a lot of effort. The wood groaned, and the iron creaked, as if it didn't want to be opened. Finally, after what felt like forever, the lock snapped, and I lifted the lid. A musty, almost metallic smell hit me, like the air inside had been sealed away for too long. I peered inside and found a stack of letters tied together with a black ribbon, yellowed with age, and on top of the letters, laying perfectly still, was a doll, a porcelain doll with closed eyes and an eerie, lifelike expression. I reached in, picked it up, and instantly felt a strange warmth. It was too warm, as if it were alive. I set the doll down aside, disturbed but intrigued, and untied the black ribbon around the letters. I opened the first one, and the handwriting looked rushed, almost desperate. It read, "If you are reading this, you have opened the chest. Close it now. You don't know what you have awakened." A chill went down my spine, but I couldn't stop. I reached for the second letter. This one was even more urgent. "The one who lies within sees you now. You must leave before it's too late. Once disturbed, it will follow you." I felt a creeping sense of dread, but I had to know more. I opened the third letter. The ink smeared like it had been written with a shaking hand. "The doll, it's not what it seems. She waits, searching for someone to take her place. Do not let her find you. Do not look into her eyes." I looked over at the doll, half expecting it to have moved, but it was still laying there, eyes closed. I reached down to put it back in the chest, but as I touched it, I felt an icy grip wrap around my wrist. Yet there was nothing there. I pulled my hand back, my pulse racing. The air in the room felt colder, heavier, and I could swear I heard faint whispers, like voices carried by a distant breeze. The chest was still open, the letters laying scattered inside, but I didn't dare reach in again. Instead, I moved to shut the lid, hoping that would put an end to this nightmare. But as I did, I felt something watching me. The doll's eyes were still closed, yet I had this intense feeling that it was aware of me, as if it was waiting for that moment I'd make eye contact. I slammed the lid shut and backed away, feeling that same strange oppressed presence hanging over me. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic, as if whatever was trapped inside was angry that I interrupted its slumber. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those whispers again. They start faint like they were coming from another room, and then grew louder, closer, filling my ears with what sounded like words I couldn't understand. I'd open my eyes and the room would be empty, but the sensation of being watched never left. In the morning, I decided I couldn't keep the chest in my house. I drove it out to a remote spot and left it there, hoping that would end whatever curse it seemed to carry. But it didn't. The whispers still follow me, sometimes faint, sometimes loud, like an echo of that night. And then, just this morning, I received a notification on my phone, an ad on Facebook Marketplace for a chest. The same chest. The title read, "Mystery Chest Unopened for Decades. What's Inside?" I'll never forget the day I brought the clock home. I'd found it on Facebook Marketplace, listed as antique grandfather clock, chimes at odd hours, even when not wound. The title was strange, almost like a warning, but I thought it was just a quirky way of making it sound more mysterious. And honestly, I thought it would be a beautiful addition in my house. I'd always wanted a vintage piece like that, something with history. The seller, who was an older man, was very eager to get rid of it. When I arrived to pick it up, he barely looked at me as he opened the door, and he didn't say much. He just nodded toward the clock, which was already by the front door, as if he had been hoping someone would take it off his hands. As I was loading it into my truck, he muttered something that stayed with me. "Once it's yours, don't try to return it." I laughed it off, thinking he was just being funny or dramatic. When I got it home, I set it up in my living room. I immediately noticed the detail. The clock was nearly 7 feet tall, with elaborate carvings along the sides that looked like twisting vines and strange symbols. It had a heavy glass door, a pendulum that looked a little tarnished, and a key for winding it. But here's the strange part. I didn't wind it. I didn't even think about winding it because I figured it wouldn't work after being moved. I thought of it more as a decoration than a functional clock. The first night I was woken by a chime. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming I was just hearing things in my sleep. But then it chimed again. I glanced at my phone. It was 3:12 in the morning. The clock was supposed to chime on the hour, not at a random time like that. Confused, I went downstairs, figuring that maybe I'd accidentally wound it without realizing it, or that something was wrong with its mechanism. The next day I checked it out, even tried to turn the key to see if it would wound, but the clock was completely unwound, and yet as soon as I closed the glass door, it chimed again 3 times, slow and deep. Each chime echoed through the room, sending a shiver down my spine. It made no sense. An unwound clock shouldn't be chiming at all. I started to get nervous, but I convinced myself that maybe it just had some kind of internal mechanism that I didn't understand. After all, it was an antique. But the next few nights, it chimed at random times again. 2:47 a.m., 4:05 p.m., 1:11 a.m. Each time, I felt this strange chill in the air, as if the room grew colder whenever the clock sounded. After about a week of this, things got even stranger. The clock started chiming not just at odd hours, but in the middle of the night, with an intensity that was unsettling. One night I woke up to it chiming, but it didn't stop at 12. It kept going. 13, 14, 15. I lost count as it echoed through the house, each chime sounding slower, darker, as if whatever was inside the clock was trying to reach out. I decided to move it out of the living room, thinking maybe I'd feel better if it wasn't so close to where I slept. I dragged it to the far end of the hallway and left it there, hoping the distance would help me sleep. But that night the chimes returned, louder and closer than ever, as if the clock hadn't moved at all. At this point, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to figure out what was going on, so I decided to open the glass door and inspect it. As soon as I touched the door, a cold wave washed over me, like stepping into an ice-cold room. I opened the door slowly, and that's when I saw it. Inside on the glass was a small smudged fingerprint, only it didn't look like mine. It was smaller, almost childlike, and it was pressed firmly on the inside of the glass, where no one should have been able to touch. I backed away, heart pounding, but something compelled me to keep looking. Then I noticed the pendulum. It was moving back and forth, but it wasn't just swinging. It was dragging slightly, as if something was weighing it down. The more I stared at it, the more it seemed to slow, until it finally stopped, and the room fell silent. But in that silence, I could feel something, an energy, a presence, almost like someone else was in the room with me. I slammed the door shut, hoping that would end whatever was happening, but the chimes didn't stop. They started again, slow and deliberate, one after another. Even though I hadn't wound the clock at all, the sound was different this time, each chime ringing out with a weight, a finality that felt ominous. The next night I woke up with a start. feeling that same coldness, but this time it wasn't coming from the clock. It was all around me, wrapping around my bed like a blanket of icy air. I sat up, and in the darkness I saw it, a faint shadow standing in the corner of my room, almost hidden, just out of reach. It was like a figure, barely visible, watching. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the shadow remained unmoving, staring. In a panic, I turned on the light, but the shadow disappeared. The clock, though, started chiming again, loud and slow. Even though it was all the way down the hallway, it felt like it was inside my head. Each chime louder than the last. Pounding drew me, as if something was trying to get my attention. The next morning I decided to call the seller. When he picked up, I told him everything. The chimes, the shadow, the strange coldness. He was silent for a moment before he said, "I told you not to bring it back." There was a strange tense in his voice, a kind of fear that made me realize he'd been through this too. "I can't take it back," he added. "It's yours now. You let it in." "Let what in?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just hung up, leaving me with the sound of silence. I thought about getting rid of it, but something told me it wouldn't be that simple. Whatever was in that clock wasn't going to let go so easily. Over the next few days, the chimes became relentless, echoing through the house at random intervals, sometimes in the middle of the day, sometimes in the dead of night. Each time the air grew colder, and I started to see the shadow more often, just lingering in the corners, watching. It felt like the clock was a doorway, like something had been waiting inside it all this time, just waiting to be freed. Now I don't know what to do. The chimes never stop, the shadow never leaves, and no matter where I put the clock, it feels like it's right beside me, like it's following me. I thought about smashing it, but some part of me is afraid that would only make things worse, that whatever inside would finally be released. So if you ever see an ad on Facebook Marketplace for an antique grandfather clock, one that chimes at odd hours, even when not wound, take my advice, leave it alone. Some things are better left undisturbed.